So just like a recap of last week. So we had, let me double check, is audio okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And everyone can see the slides. Okay, so last week we talked about, we had a review of the comprehensive land use planning process in the Philippines. So there are 12 steps, starting with organizing the stakeholders and then creating the plan by step 7. And then the approach in the Philippines is a ridge to reef approach, basically dividing the land into 4 groups: the forest, the upland, the lowland, and the coastal marine. Okay, let me check. Am I sharing my screen? Oh, not sharing. There we go. So kana siya. And then the different agencies in charge, the housing board, the DNR, the Department of Agriculture, Department of Agrarian Reform, the NCIP, the ILG, and various other government officials. The key thing we need to sort of remember about Philippine land use planning policy is that it's very, what do we call this? The goal is to make it as comprehensive, from forest, upland, lowland, coastal, and marine. But also it's challenging because there's so many different governing bodies that it's hard to coordinate with all of them. And then the CLUP tries to create a guideline for how this process should be done, or uh, basically advise how it should be done. And then urban sprawl is a big issue for all urban sort of communities, not just abroad, but also here in the Philippines. So it's when we have a um, rapid increase in development of single use, usually residential developments along the fringes, or um, the, we call it the green field, or the undeveloped spaces in a city. So what we're trying to do in this class is to find ways to manage urban growth. And then one sort of key solution is the urban growth boundary. So today we'll be discussing even more sort of ways to manage urban growth with the use of impact fees, transfer of development rights, and growth boundary. So I tried to get through the other readings, protecting environmental natural resources, historic preservation, and etc. But it's a bit dense. It was more dense than I thought. So let's get started on impact fees. So I tried with a sort of a quick slide of impact fees, but then this lecture will slowly devolve into like my tabs on my research, just explaining how to interpret the given material. So the materials that we have on Google Drive are very kanang, I wouldn't say technical. They're just very, very in-depth and long. And then it would be good to start off like the way I would study these texts, these references. I start off with a simple definition, like just Google a definition, and more or less, if it aligns with the text, then you know you're on the right track. So for this morning, I started with looking at what are the different sort of definitions of impact fees. So an impact fee is basically a tax imposed by the local government, but directed to the developers of a project. So it's not tax on the people who live in an area, but it's tax for the developers to pay all or a portion of the cost for providing public services to their new development. For example, if a developer wants to create a subdivision, the local government, usually requested by the public, um, steps in to provide or to request that the developer needs to pay a certain amount to help, what they call this, fund the public infrastructure that connects the new project, or let's say subdivision, to the existing urban fabric. So for example, I have another definition over here. So this is from Lubbock, the city of Lubbock in Texas. So the scenario is company X is turning a vacant lot into a restaurant, basically upgrading it. So you have a vacant lot, you're turning it into a restaurant. And or you have developer Y is creating a new subdivision, basically greenfield again, no development, it's just a vacant land, and then they're sort of building new development on top of it. So impact fees in sort of most cities in the US, these are already part of the process. Like whenever you develop something, here in the Philippines, I tried to research as much as I can, but I couldn't find any existing legal sort of precedents or legal documents, even news that talks about impact fees in the Philippines, but in the US is already established. So impact fees is another definition, are one-time sort of payments for company X or company Y, basically a developer uh, to cover their fair share to maintain the same quality of services and facilities for all as Lubbock citizens as the city. This will allow the city to meet increased demand from residents, customers, and businesses. So if you think about a new subdivision, it will need access to water, electricity, and telecommunications. So usually, according to the references, before impact fees, the developer wouldn't need to pay for those. They just create the sort of the new roads and the subdivision roads all within their property, but they don't pay the government to create extensions for what they call this, like water, power, and telecommunications. So it makes sense because if the developers just provide the lot and there's no access to water, electricity, and communications, no one will buy that lot or no one will live there. So the idea is that to ensure that there's electricity, water, and telecommunications in any project, the government asks the developer for those fees so that they can be serviced. And then these fees are usually justified by increased demand. So these changes increase demand on services and facilities that the city provides, such as water, sewer, roads, and other public infrastructure and facilities. And then these fees also add to local funds that the government can then use to improve even other public infrastructure. Another example here is the California development impact fees. So these are all established already. And then you see here, same example. This time they have names. So Alicia is turning a vacant office into a restaurant. George is building a new home. So these new developments create increased demand on public services like water, sewer, roads, parks, etc. And then the one-time impact fee covers their fair share to maintain the same quality of services. So again, sewers, roads, basically public infrastructure, meeting increased demands from residents, customers, and businesses. And then the fee can also be used to support local funds within the community. And then basically, fees contribute to local investments in water and sewer, library, parks and schools, streets, bikeways, sidewalks, lighting, and crosswalks. So these are already pretty much established in the US, and they're different from city to city. So if you go to our reference here, I would suggest you start with this reference. It's not arranged in the Google Drive, but if you start with impact fee logic with Harry A. Stewart, and then that's chapter 5 of what do you call this? It doesn't say the book is called Development Impact Fees. I tried to find it online, but I can't seem to find a copy because the issue with this reference again is that most of its research is based on documents from the 1985, 1986, so late 1980s or the later half of 1980s. It's a bit old, but that's why I took a quick look at history of impact development fees in the US. So it's just an excerpt from Wikipedia for beginning your research or like your understanding of these kinds of topics. Wikipedia is very useful, but please, I want to reiterate that don't use Wikipedia as a reference for your reports or assignments, or especially your thesis. But this is just for us to understand how impact fees came to be so prominent in the US. So I'll just quickly read here. So impact fees were first implemented in Hinsdale, Illinois, Chicago in 1947 to finance a water treatment plant expansion to the Hillsdale Sanitary District. uh, President John A. Wayne implemented a tap-in fee of $50 per new residential sewer line. So the sanitary district was sued by the Illinois Home Building Association, but the district prevailed. So the case was appealed to the Illinois Supreme Court, and that court ruled that impact fees are legal if used for capital expenditures, but not legal if used for operating expenses. So basically, this means that what do you call this? The the company was what do you call this? The sanitary district implemented a fee of $50 for like new businesses, new subdivisions to tap in. So $50 per new residential sewer line. Of course, the local home building association didn't like this, didn't like a new fee, but the courts ruled that impact fees are legal for capital expenditures, meaning expenditures that you pay at the start of the project, which are very different from operating expenses. Basically, impact fees have become sort of the way for U.S. cities and U.S. Communities to ensure that all new developments have access to water, electricity, and telecommunications, etc. So by the 1950s and 1960s, impact fees became more widely accepted, building on the court cases from the like 1940s, 1950s. And then you will see in our reference that even more court cases are highlighted. And it always goes back to the fact that impact fees are used to help fund capital recovery fees, or basically the cost of creating new infrastructure. And usually water and sewer facilities are the most easily, what they call this, argued that we need impact fees because it's the most basic necessity. It's easy to calculate how much the impact fee would cost. And then a bit later in this discussion, I will show you where in the references it explains how to calculate. So a simple calculation is also given. But again, the caveat is that in the Philippines, I couldn't find any impact fee. So this could be possible, but with any sort of like funding project or funding proposal, it needs to be studied. But this has been proven to be fairly successful in the US, so it might be applicable in the Philippines. Emphasis on might. So I'll just go through here very quickly. Let's see, one example case here of Golden. I think this is the company Golden versus the Planning Board of Ramapo, Construction Industry Association of Sonoma County versus the City of Petaluma, California, are the legal basis for the use of impact fees to finance public infrastructure throughout the United States. Finally, in the 1980s, the impact fee became a universally used funding approach for services and started to include municipal facilities such as fire stations, police stations, and libraries. After court cases in states such as Florida and California approved their legal use, many other states enacted laws which approved the use of impact fees by local jurisdictions. So this is also in our reference, which I will show in a bit. But I just want to highlight that these kinds of funding programs start out at the local level. And then if they're successful there, very likely they can be adopted to other areas. Now, in the Philippines, again, I mentioned that I couldn't find any impact fees in any literature, just Google or whatever. So this might mean that if your community has a problem with water, sewerage, especially in Cebu, we have a big problem with water supply. Maybe we can use these examples to create our own impact fee program specifically for water and sanitation for Cebu. So maybe this could be included in your our final report, like what can we do to improve our local community. So impact fees have been developed as an offspring of in lieu fees. So these are a different kind of fee. We won't go much into this, but have had a more significant impact on funding infrastructure. In some cases, the use of impact fees has developed its own phrase of growth should pay its own way. Basically, if a city needs to grow, the people who sort of facilitate that growth need to make sure that they install the proper public infrastructure. Okay. So I will show you where that part is in the reference. So I'll just open up my notes here to go a bit faster. Okay, so this first reference, I went a bit fast here. Okay, so this first reference talks about the need for public officials or the public sector to interfere with the market. So we mentioned last week that in the Philippines, it's basically development is given to the free market, or basically no guidance, just let the market do what it wants, let the developer do what they want. So it has led to a lot of unplanned development because there are no restrictions, there's no management programs in place. So basically, this first section here talks about what politicians or people in the public sector need to do to sort of get into implementing impact fees. And basically, it starts with the question of, should we tax existing residents to pay for the cost of providing the infrastructure for new customers, or shall we require newcomers to pay their fair share of the cost? And this chapter here talks about a approach to developing impact fees that will be sort of useful for any like beginning impact fee program, specifically in the Philippines, because we don't have any. So the whole point of this idea is that, for example, new subdivision, who will pay for the new infrastructure? Will it be the residents who are not yet in that subdivision but in that area, that barangay, or is it actually the residents of the specific subdivision who need to pay for those new what they call this new infrastructure? So obviously, I think the answer here is that it should be the developer, not the residents who pay, because the residents should be the developers should be providing the complete package, like a lot with water, electricity, and access to telecommunication. I don't think, as far as I know, maybe some developers in Cebu do provide just a lot, and then the residents have to pay for like the water extension, like the physical infrastructure for water. But um, in the subdivision I'm currently living in now, we're still paying water to the home association, but the infrastructure for water, electricity, and telecommunications already came with the lot. So I think that's already pretty standard here in Cebu, at least. But what is the funding scheme or the payment scheme for those infrastructure? I don't know. But at least in the US, it's already impact fees already legal or like popular, and they have a lot of sort of legal validity. So other examples here of court cases that validate impact fees, you have Contractors and Builders Association of Pinellas County, city of versus the city of Dundin. This was a court case in 1976. And then if you want to take a look at the court case, you can just go over to Google. You just type in the court number, that's 329SO2D 314, Florida, 1976. And usually you would come up with the court text, because this is public data. And usually you would find a website for this. So you can download the whole court case, or you can just read the summary here. So there's some opinions. These are usually in a lot of kind of lawyer jargon. I studied a bit of this in my postgrad in Sydney. We had a lawyer teach it to us, and even then, I had the difficulty sort of following. So I would suggest you just click on the summary, and then they have they just simplify what was talked about in the case. So in summary, like in Contractors Builders Association versus the City of Dublin, the Florida Supreme Court concluded that the city had the authority under Florida's Constitution and statutory law to impose an impact fee to defray the capital cost of improving the city's water and sewage system to meet the increased demand created by the new development. So basically, the city of Dundin won, and then the contractors, the builders, had to pay the impact fee. Okay. And then in our reference, we have a list of, like, at least from the 1980s, typical types of impact fees. So I'll just zoom in on this for the sake of the recording. So we have water impact fees are the most enacted. No, followed by sewers actually. So 55 enacted sewer impact fees, 54 enacted water impact fees, followed by road impact fees at 20, then parks 19, fire station 17, and the rest are drainage, school, beach facilities, police stations, libraries, and then trash facilities. The most that are in draft are roads. So a lot of studying needs to be done with roads. So if you look at this table, the most complicated probably is road impact fees, because there's a lot of road impact fees that are still in the draft stage and are currently being studied as of, at least I say currently, but this is data from 1986. Okay, so what are the usual phases of impact fees? So a developer wants to create a new project, usually a subdivision or something like that, and then the government steps in. So this writer, let's see, well, I forget his name, Stewart. The writing of this article is a bit on the lighter side. It's almost very it reads like a narrative, a storybook even, and it's very kanang light. So there's a lot of it's not very direct, is what I'm trying to say. It meanders a bit, and sometimes it's makes it a bit challenging to read. But anyway, so there are three phases to the according to the writer Stewart, three phases of like implementing an impact fee. The first phase, what he calls hell no, we won't pay, is the developers vehemently disagreeing to pay any kind of fee. So I'll just read here a bit. So to everyone's surprise, the developers and the community are diametrically opposed to impact fees of any sort. According to the committee, the appropriate governmental response to providing for growth is to raise taxes. So this response is universally rejected by elected officials wishing to serve more than one term. Phase one generally lasts from 3 to 6 months. So basically, the first response from developers who are approached to pay impact fees, they would be very much opposed to it. So they don't want to pay the impact fees. The next phase is the let's study this problem phase. So this phase is characterized by long meetings, usually government and then a representative developer, and dissemination of extremely detailed information that is so crunched into oblique scientific formulas that calculate the bottom line, i.e. how much is this thing going to cost. So this phase can, according to the writer, last forever, and then there is no end to the universe of available formulas that can be used in calculating an impact fee. However, with some determination, this phase can be limited between 6 months to a year. So you have like a flow here. Let's see, 3 to 6 months initial sort of negotiations that how much the impact fee should be, and then another 6 months to a year to discuss the actual numbers of how much the impact fee should be for this proposed project. And then finally, phase three, what the Stewart calls love it to death, is the developer has sort of begrudgingly agreed that the impact fee is coming, and then they can't escape from it. So their partial solution to the problem, however, is with a just few friendly amendments, they can make it better. The imagination exhibited in formulating transition rules or exemptions, or even application of the proposed impact fee during this phase, will be directly proportional to the legal fees paid by the development community to oppose impact fees. Basically, developers will resort to hiring a lawyer to find a loophole to reduce their impact fees, but at the end of the day, the developers will pay those impact fees. Okay, so next part here, just some sort of guidelines for impact fees. So for this is more for those who work on the government side. So let's see here. So what do the courts say? At the end of the meat grinder-like process of imposing impact fee, what should the finished product look like in order to pass judicial muster, basically uh, to pass the courts or win the courts. It is not the intent of this chapter to discuss case law in detail. However, to recap briefly, impact fees must be fair. So in order to be fair, the expansion of the capital facilities must be required to accommodate the new users, and the fee cannot exceed the proportionate share of the expansion prorated or allocated to the new user. So the fee must be calculate so that it supplies exactly what the new users need. It can't be more, it can't be less. So that's how you make the impact fee fair. And then the funds must be earmarked. To satisfy this requirement, you need to show a reasonable connection between the expenditures of the funds collected and the benefit accruing to the new user. So basically, it's accounted again to make sure that the fees aren't too high, that it doesn't align with the new development. And then the rest of this section are the different kinds of fees for different kinds of or like different kinds of strategies for different kinds of impact fees. You have water and sewer, you have parks, roads, and jails. So we'll go back to this in a bit. We'll just skip over to let's see here. How do we deal with developers? So if you're going to be an urban designer, urban planner, more likely you'll be either working on the developer side or the government side. So for those who will be in the government side, it might be useful to know about what's the thinking of developers. I think as of the 1980s until today, there hasn't been sort of much difference in the behavior of developers. I have worked in what they call this, a developer company in Sydney, mostly just the builder. So the main goals of developers really to secure their profits. So according to Porter over here, developers are, if anything, more diverse in their opinions than our planners. So a notably difficult lot to pin down. This is, by the way, by way of explanation for the unscientific nature of research for this chapter. So the perspectives of developers and builders represented here have been sensed rather than collected from dozens of conversations, comments at meetings and conferences, and a few articles. So perhaps the most significant source of opinion were discussions of impact fees and more generally exactions that have taken place at a number of national conferences at an urban land Institute policy forum, during which developers and builders evaluated the rationale for and effects of development fees on their projects. So basically, let's see, since developers, like most other people, have learned to work in an imperfect world, they're willing to put practice before principle in order to launch a potentially profitable project. So they're very kind of profit oriented. So in this respect, they view development fees as the least of quote unquote three evils. There are two, the other two are being halt to any development, meaning their project will be stopped to await public financing. And the other one is the exaction of developer contributions through case-by-case negotiation. So this is basically, from what I understand, their funding will be examined case by case for like the different aspects of their project. So the imposition of development fees at least allows development to continue upon payment of a fee prescribed in advance. So from the developer's point of view, as long as a project continues, they'll be happy. Okay, so there are a few ideas here about concerns from the developer side, like who does the fee benefit? So that's one, and the other one is the equity issue. So I'll just like quickly read it out here. So developers make 2 points about the rightness of enacting development fees. First, they suspect that their fee payments will be used to fund facilities that benefit the entire community or special groups other than the residents and tenants of their project. So they're worried that the fee is too high because it'll be used for other benefits, not just the one in their project. So this is what Porter calls the benefit issue. The second issue is that developers believe that fees generally are passed along to residents and tenants of their projects. And when fees are added to other taxes and fees paid by all community residents, new residents will pay more than their fair share of infrastructure. So basically, the developers can argue that if a impact fee is being imposed on them, it will be eventually kind of transferred onto the new residents of that what they call this project. So because they have to pay the fees, they have to increase their prices on the land, and they're worried that they might lose customers because they're, from what I understand anyway, the land becomes more expensive, and in that way, the new residents are paying more. So I don't think we need to go into these two issues so much, but this is where the references are. So just for your reference. Okay, so let's go back to let's see here, the different types of development impact fees. So just wanted to give you an overview of the reference. So again, there's water and sewer impact fees, parks, roads, law enforcement, basically for maybe like police stations or facilities for law enforcement, and jails. And then in the next reference, the rational nexus test. This one is a bit more kind of legal jargon for basically what are the different ways to get an impact fee supported or like legalized by your local government. So these are the different steps over here, determining how existing facilities were financed, etc., etc. But I want to skip a bit to the third reference here, the traffic impact fees. Because in this reference, although the main subject is traffic impact fees, they have an appendix which shows you, I'll just go over here, which shows you the calculations for, where is it? Sorry, I thought I highlighted it. Was it here or was it? Oh, no, it's here. Sorry, it's in the second. Sorry, for some reason I got flipped around. Anyway, so here is a equation for a sample of sewer impact fees. Let's see, let's start with water impact fees first. So water impact fee equals the gallons per day, that's GPD, times what they call the cost of constructing 1 gallon of potable water capacity, and then minus what they call the credits, the present discounted value of that portion of the stream of future annual water services, water service payments allotted or allocated by use. So this one is a bit technical, but I just wanted to show you that there are for you available references for calculations. So let's just go back here to reference 1 by Stewart. So what are sewer and water impact fees? So these impact fees are the simplest to develop and defend. So each is a capital system that can be utilized and consumed only by those persons who actually connect to the system. So it is a fairly simple task to develop empirical data to show expansion needs caused by growth. So the fee may take into account an amount to pay for excess capacity carried by the existing users, as well as any future expansions required to serve new users. So for a subdivision, you just count the number of lots, how many people live in those lots, and that's how you can calculate the gallons per day. So just going over here, the simplicity in developing the fee, as well as the need for water and sewer systems to accommodate growth, probably account for the fact that this is the most popular impact fee, specifically for Florida. As of, I think this was written around 1990 or maybe even early 2000s. Next are the park impact fees. So let's look at the sample calculation for a park impact fee. So the calculation is a bit scary looking, but it actually breaks down fairly easily. So park impact fee equals means the additional park acres needed per capita of the new population generated by use. And then PI is the average number of persons per dwelling unit in use. For example, like subdivision, you count the number of people in that subdivision, multiplied by CP, the cost of acquiring, constructing a new park, and then multiplied by, excuse me, 1 minus SG. SG being the proportion of a new park acquisition and construction costs historically provided by state government and other non-local government sources. So the idea is you gather up all the costs for creating a new park, like how big the park should be, multiplied by how many people will be using that park, and then you multiply it with the new park acquisition cost, the proportion of new park acquisition and construction cost. Then once you have those figures, you multiply it again by 1 minus UD, the percentage. I'll just zoom out a bit. The percentage of the present tax base represented by undeveloped land. So those who are represented by undeveloped land divided by, okay, this one is a bit tricky because I'm not too familiar about bonds. Divided by the bond year factor, which is the number of years in which debt service has been paid to retire park bonds divided by the total number of years of debt service. So this is a bit technical. I'm not sure we have, I think we have some form of bonds here in Cebu, but I've actually never dealt with any sort of bond payments. Then PCF, the present value factor of the stream of past property tax revenues paid to provide debt services on the bonds. And then you subtract finally with the combination of DS, the property tax rate used for debt service, multiplied by the ATV, average taxable value of class of use, and then multiplied by the FCF, the present factor value of stream of future property tax payable to provide debt service. So this one, a lot of steps, unfortunately. But the idea is that you have the area of the park multiplied by basically the cost of getting that park subtracted by the, what do you call this? Property tax rate used for, this is a bit, how do I simplify this? Subtracted by the amount of the cost it takes to, what do you call this? Basic, how do I, average taxable value of class use or taxable value, present value factor, payments available to provide that service. So let me see. Let me zoom out a bit. So this first part here is the cost of creating the park. The second part here is the bond year factor, the present value factor, and then the next part here is the tax rates used in that community. So again, it's just a sample. This might be what do you call this? Not so not so applicable. Maybe if we have the information on bonds and like tax base for Cebu, but it'll get a bit more complicated when we get to the next type. But anyway, going back to park impact fees. So park impact fees are almost tied in popularity with roads as frequently adopted impact fees. So however, park impact fees are much simpler to develop than those for roads. So you need an inventory of parks available along with an adopted standard or level of service, LOS, and a capital improvements program for expansion to accommodate new users. So an example here is Broward County. The standard adopted The standard adopted was 3 acres per 1,000 population for local parks and the same acreage requirement for regional parks. Since the existing inventory did not meet the standard, Broward approved a $77 million in general obligation bonds to purchase additional parkland to meet the standard it had. So socioeconomic data from various sources were used to calculate the number of people per household, and data from tax rolls were used to calculate the average cost of land. This information was used to produce a schedule of fees and capital improvements program and was developed to accommodate new users. So the developers could dictate 3 acres for every 1,000 residents, then pay an equal amount to the value of land that would be dedicated or paid the amount shown on the schedule developed. Basically, just providing the state of what they call this, or the county of Broward already had a standard for how much park should be given to a group of people, and then they just calculated the population growth, and then they calculated how much parks they would need to accommodate the new population. Then finally, probably the most complicated one is the road impact fees. I'll just read the descriptions before going to the calculations. So the level of difficulty in proving the rational nexus. So rational nexus basically means it's a legal principle. So it's a legal term, which requires that there is a rational, definable benefit that accrues to any property owner assessed, a fee for said benefit in the what they call this. These other definitions here are not really connected. But anyway, it's a legal principle which requires that there's a rational and definable benefit that accrues to any property owner. So basically, the idea is that once you prove that there is a connection or a benefit of the sort of new project or the fee, then you can it has more legal merit. So the level of difficulty in providing that principle, that rational nexus, is much greater than for water, sewer, or parks. This is because the road system is a capital system that can be characterized by non-exclusive use and joint consumption by the public. So with water, the end users are very obvious. It's the residents, and they're the only ones who drink the water, use the power, etc. For parks, it's a bit more kind of complicated because if you have a public, not a semi-public park in a subdivision, the subdivision owners can use that park, but they can also invite guests. For roads, however, it connects a subdivision to the existing like urban fabric, but that road is not exclusively used by the subdivision residents. So it could be used in the future, for example. Let's see. I think I'll go to a visual example here. For example, let's look at a subdivision here in Talamban. Oh no, let's go to University of Centrales. So USC Talamban, there are several subdivisions in this area. So for example, we have one here. Doña Rita Village in Barangay Banilad. So let's say that this road, this Banilad road here, which I will highlight, measure length. Okay, like that. So let's say this road wasn't constructed yet. So to create this access to their subdivision, the developer needs to create a road, and usually they would ask the help of the public sector to provide a road. And then because it's public infrastructure, the developer might argue that they don't need to be given impact fees because it's the government's job to provide the road. And then the road will another reason why they don't need to have impact fees is the road is not only beneficial for the people in Doña Rita village over here, but it's also beneficial for everyone else, like for example, University of San Carlos, etc., etc. This is just an example. I think historically Banilad Road existed before what they call this Doña Rita village, but in a case where let's go further north, like here for Talamban Viejo. So we have a very small road here. I think the entrance should be somewhere here. So you have this very large private subdivisions. It has almost an 8-lane road entrance, but the road that connects it to the rest of the city is only 2 lanes. So clearly, there is no what they call this growth management happening here, because this subdivision will create hundreds of new homes, but their access to the subdivision is not appropriate because the subdivision itself has 8 lanes and then the actual access road is only 2 lanes. So if there were impact fees in play, maybe the developer of Prevea Hills could have given to the government some kind of um, funds to improve the access road. So this road is A Minyosa, and all the way from the entrance of Prevea Hills down to, let's go to the city center, it's always a 2-lane road. So as you see, this is the quality of that road. So what the book is trying to argue here is that because roads has like so much more users than the residents in that particular subdivision, the rational nexus or the legal idea that sort of defines who benefits from the development becomes very challenging to prove. So going further, calculating the specific prorated shares of expand. This is like an accounting term. It's like an increasing number of benefits of expansion costs, which are attributed to new growth for water and sewer is fairly simple. In contrast, the same calculation in the case of roads is difficult, if not impossible, to accomplish in a manner that accurately and consistently reflects the actual cost and benefit of the capital system to individual households. So let me reiterate, it's almost impossible to accomplish in a manner that accurately and consistently reflects the actual cost and benefit of the capital system, meaning the road, to individual households. Excuse me. Fortunately, however, there for those 20 Florida communities that were highlighted in this case law, basically have enacted some form of road impact fee. The contractors court noted that perfection is not the standard of municipal duty. However, it would appear that the impact fee becomes less appropriate as a means of financing capital expansion, as the relationship between impact fee formula and the fee payer's actual impact on the capital system becomes more tenuous. So for roads, it is clear that there will be some impact on the system by any development, whether it generates traffic or it only attracts it. So without going into detailed analysis of Broward County's computer system, let's see here, or Palm Beach County's formula, suffice to say that the formulas for calculating this impact fee are becoming more numerous and less precise as each decision that expands local government authority to impose impact fees is rendered. So basically, we'll just skip here to the next part. Now, what are the elements necessary to support a road impact fee? These elements must include a specified adopted level of service, configuration of existing road network, trip generation rates. So trip generation rates are basically the number of trips from point A to point B generated by a new road to determine impact on the traffic system. Basically, you're counting the number of people who will use that road currently, and then when a new road is developed, how will that impact the travel and the number of people going along that path? Socioeconomic data along with adopted land use plan to predict growth patterns by various types of land use and geographical location. Fifth, capital improvements to plan, capital improvements plan to accommodate the new users, identification of roads in the capital improvements plan that do not currently meet the adopted standards. So, what are the existing deficiencies of the existing road? So, identification of another one is identification of some source of revenue other than impact fees to improve existing deficiencies. So, because the a road project is usually so large, the impact fees might not be enough to just fund the new road. Construction cost data, land value information, and then finally gas tax credit mechanism to ensure that new users get credit for future gas taxes that they will pay. And then this is where if the park sample fee was complicated, it will be even more complicated when we look at the road impact fee formula. So the idea is that road impact fee is determined by daily average trip ends, trip lengths divided by a 2A cap. The cap is the capacity of the lane at a level of service D. So for those not familiar, um, what we mean by level of service is A is the highest and D is the lowest. So for example, in a road situation, A meaning traffic flows smoothly, there's no delays, and then D is like it's still flowing but at a very slow rate, like it's barely what they call this. You can barely transport goods and services on that road. Multiplied by C, the construction and right-of-way acquisition per land mile, per lane mile, and then credit deducted by credits, discounted present value of the stream of motor fuel and property tax revenue used to finance road capital costs for each use. So this, just doing the daily trip average, this whole thing here, this daily trip average is like a separate study in of itself. Because it's like to analyze trips, you need to survey for like that whole section of the road. You need to survey for at least what they call this, maybe a few months, or maybe even 6 months, and then you have to have people on that road at least maybe like 8 hours a day to really get the actual data. So very costly, very complicated to do these road impact fees. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 10 steps or 10 elements to include in road impact fees. I just need you to be familiar with it because these are what they call this. This might be the most feasible for the Philippines because it's already widely kind of accepted in the US. But what they call this, we still need to do our own feasibility studies here in Cebu and our different local communities to see if this is really feasible. Is there I think there really is a need. So if you can see areas in Cebu look like this, then we have subdivisions where's that big one? Like in this area here, in Talamban in particular, there are so many subdivisions with a capacity of over maybe like 500, 200 homes, 200 to 500 homes. And they're all near this area, north of Cebu. So we have Talamban Viejo, Cristina North, Villa Sebastiana, and you see they're all encroaching upon the hilly areas or the mountainous areas of Cebu, which, as we mentioned before, is not really the most ideal location for subdivisions. Developers are just building here because it's cheaper and then land is available. So we don't, what's the main problem with Cebu City is that, I just highlight Cebu City. Because of its economic development, there is growing population, and then the population tends also to grow not just in numbers but also financial capacity. So these kinds of subdivisions, residential developments, will most likely be still in demand, like 10 years, 20 years, maybe even 50 years down the line, but they use up a lot of land. So the worry here or the danger here is that they start building into our protected areas here in the northwestern side of Cebu. So the goal of impact fees is Not really so much to manage that growth, but to make sure at least when we do develop outside of the city or outside the urban area, those new subdivisions will be serviced with water, sewage, electricity, etc., etc. Okay, and then maybe those impact fees will what they call this, although not directly related to managing growth, slow down growth in a way that developers don't just freely build on these protected lands. So these are kind of connected, although a bit loosely. Okay, so other notes here on impact fees. Um, Really, the only one you need is the first one. And because we don't have much time, I won't really go into much of the traffic impact fees. You can read that on your own. This traffic impact fee reference is a bit newer. Oh, wait, no, I was wrong. It was the other reference. This traffic impact fee reference is from probably 1990 as well. So, hmm. But the good thing about this document here, it shows you three clear examples. One in Montgomery County in Maryland, the city of Loveland in Colorado, and Orange County in Florida. So this might be useful for anyone doing like traffic studies or the what they call this. What is the process to um, fund public infrastructure with regards to traffic impact fees? So this could be useful for you. But for us, the quiz next week will mostly focus here on impact fees, chapter 5 and chapter 6. Basically, how to implement impact fees, and how to convince developers to comply with those proposed impact fees. Okay, it's already 2:07. We have a few more things to cover. The next sort of tool for managing growth is the practice of transfer of development rights. So what is the transfer of development right? I'll just show it here with an image. Okay. So the basic idea of the transfer of development rights is that, for example, in an open space preservation or a protected land area is being contested or like being eyed by a developer, and they want to construct like a new subdivision area there. Like for example, here in Cebu, we might have our protected land area encroached upon by new development. So the idea is the owners of that open space preservation sell their development rights to the CBD, not really necessarily CBD, but the urban areas to increase square footage, height of the number of units, and then the urban area pays for the conservation of the open space. So basically, the built up areas or the governments in the built up areas pay for increased development rights. So they can build taller in their area, so they don't need to build in the open space preservation. So some other definitions here that are a bit more kind of easier to digest. So a transfer development rights program seeks to preserve, I'll just zoom in a bit more, landowners' assets of asset value by moving the right to build a house from a location where development is prohibited to a location where development is encouraged. For example, protected land, you can't develop here, so I'll give you what they call this, more the right to build taller and larger buildings in an area that where development is encouraged. So because the total number of houses ultimately built is larger, in the larger region does not go down as a result of simply moving the geographic location of the new homes, there should be enough money available overall to compensate landowners in the restricted area for any decline in their land value without sacrificing the profits of landowners elsewhere. So the trick is to transfer part of the purchase price of for land in a location where development is encouraged to a landowner in a place where development is prohibited. Basically, just going like this. So the landowners where development is encouraged, they give what they call this. They give an amount, cash, price to increase their development rights. So taller buildings, more houses, etc. So another definition of transfer development rights here. So transfer development rights is a zoning technique that conserves land by redirecting development that would otherwise occur on the land, uh, the sending area, to a receiving area suitable for denser development. This technique operates so that owners in the sending area can be compensated for their redirected development rights. So I'll just read the reference from here. I'll skip to the definitions. Let's see here. My throat is dying. Okay. So in this, our reference from Johnston and Madison, a TDR, or transfer development rights, is the sale of one's parcel's development rights to the owner of another parcel. So the idea that on the prohibited land, you could build a certain height, certain volume of building, but since you want to preserve that volume, you sell those rights to an area that has that already has a built environment. Basically, just densifying an already built up area and like preserving an nature reserve or something like that. So which allows more, again, TDR is the sale of one's parcel's development rights to an owner of another parcel, which allows more development on the second parcel while reducing or preventing development on the originating parcel. So under such a program, development rights are severed from a lot designated for protection, the quote-unquote sending area, and the severed rights are transferred to a lot in an area where additional development is permitted, aka the receiving area. So there's an interesting section here on the history of TDRs. So again, this is fairly established in the US. So the concept of TDR was first introduced, let me zoom out a bit, in 1916 in New York City. A zoning ordinance permitted lot owners to sell their unused air rights to adjacent lots, thus allowing the receiving lot to exceed the height and setback requirements. So in the Philippines, I'll just stop here for a bit. We have the National Building Code for those who are not practicing architects or engineers. So in the National Building Code, there is what we call a building height limit. So I don't think transfer of development rights is being practiced in the Philippines because I've never heard of it before. So let's see here. I'll just go to that section with building heights. Is it here? No. Lower building height limit. Light and ventilation. There is setbacks. Let me zoom out a bit just to show you the actual document. Okay. We're getting close. BHL, maybe I should just control F. BHL. Yeah, while my PDF is loading, so if you see here, there are some diagrams that show you the required building height limit for buildings in the Philippines. There's also setback limits. For example, in a road right of way, which of like 14 meters, the building has to have a angular plane to establish incremental setbacks to preserve light and ventilation. So for example, you have a 16 or 18-story building. There is a law that says at 65.5 degrees from the center of the road right away, the building needs to set back. So this allows for light and ventilation on both sides of the road, and then protects other buildings and other surrounding areas from like the shadow of the new taller building. So what do you call this? Building height limit also works the same way. So if a TDR exchange is implemented in the Philippines in an area that is designated as an urban zone or a development zone, we could move the proposed development from the protected land area to a what do you call this? Like an urban core area where development is encouraged. So I'm trying to find that table for building height. Can't seem to find it at the moment because usually I'm using this for setbacks. BHL, road right of way. Requirements for air changes, housing. Maybe it's in section 7. Currently, I'm in section 8. Here we go. Determining building bulk. So, as a and as with my experience from architecture, most of the time this is being followed in Cebu. So, for example, residentials, according to their specific zones, have different building heights. So for R1, the least dense building height is only up to 10 meters. For R2, it's still 10 meters, but there's two classifications of residential too. There's basic and there's maximum. For basic R2, it's 10 meters building height, that's BHL. Then for maximum R2, that's 15 meters building height. Then as you go to more denser developments, R3 goes up to 36. Maximum R3 is 36. R4 goes up to townhouses. Specific R4 specifically for townhouses and small residential developments. That's why building height is still at 10. But R5 condominiums and apartments goes up to 18 stories or 54 meters building height. And then the same thing can be seen in commercial area 1, 2, and 3, where it goes up from 15 to 45 to 180 meters respectively, and then etc. etc. So that's the idea behind the transfer of development rights. So let's just continue. So the first court case to review a TDR involved New York City's limitation of development on two privately owned parks. So the city had rezoned parks to prevent construction of two luxury apartment buildings in them. So, but allowed for the transfer of unused development rights to another Manhattan parcel larger than 30,000 square feet. The park owner sued, alleging that this restriction was unconstitutional, was an unconstitutional taking of his private property without compensation. So the park owner wanted to create a new building on his land, but the government or the public sector stepped in and said they can't build here because it's protected land. And then the park owner sued, saying like he's not being compensated for the loss of the development. The New York Court of Appeals agreed that finding that the severed rights being unattached to any receiving parcel were too contingent for adequate compensation, especially since the severance was mandatory. So the court did uphold the legality in general, and then um, basically the park owner won. And then in 1968, the New York City Planning Commission amended its transfer program to reduce the financial hardships imposed by the historic landmark regulation by allowing the sale of units of development, the sale of units of development rights to parcels several blocks away. So the owners of the example here is Grand Central Terminal challenged the historic landmark regulation as a taking of private property. So the United States Court upheld the regulation as valid in the court case Penn Central Station Co. versus New York City. And then although the court did not address the validity of the TDR program itself, it found that transferable rights undoubtedly mitigate whatever financial burdens the law has imposed. And then the last paragraph here, New York's early TDR program allowed transfers only within small defined areas. Later TDR programs to Chicago and in New York City allowed transfers within larger designated districts, such as New York Waterfront District, where one area of the district was granted increased density and one area of the district of the same district was restricted from further building. So the concept of entirely separate sending and receiving districts um, for respectively preservation and development was a later modification of TDR, which was considered difficult to use because of the down zoning in the preservation area. So in voluntary TDR programs, mandatory downsiding is replaced by financial incentives that encourage development transfer. So long and short of it, we'll go back again to these images here. So because owners of rural zones feel like, or like the down zoned areas, or let's just say the the sending areas, they can't develop anything because the law prevents them. They are compensated by that sort of lack of opportunity by the government. So basically, wherever they send the development rights to, the receiver needs to pay a certain amount to the sender. So that's basically what TDR is. So it's already 12:21. I'll just quickly go over the last one here. So urban growth management, we talked about this already, but let's just quickly go over it and see. Apparently, I think I reused the same resource, but it's in the list. So that's urban growth management by director. So the first one is an introduction of urban growth management. So it's just chapter 3 called Managing Community Expansion, Where to Grow. The book is called Forces of Change. So chapter 3 chapter 3 of the book is called Managing Community Expansion. Wait. Oh, sorry, the I don't know what the book title is. This is just the name of the reference. But anyway, so there is a need to manage where we grow. And in this section here, you have different sort of arguments to limit growth. And then in the next sort of chapter over here, the Seattle-Tacoma City region, rescaling the spaces of fragmented places, is a case study on Seattle. So over here, sorry, that was the last page. Sorry, I'm getting a bit messy with my readings. Okay, sorry. The last sort of reference here for managing urban growth is an examination of Portland City region. So according to this article by, what's this? Dear Rector, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Portland Council or the Portland area has been successful with managing their growth. Although it's not really what they call this, there is no clear step-by-step process explained as to how they manage their growth. It's more like of a story of how Portland and the Portland City region successfully kanang plan for growth. So over here, I'll just skip to the conclusion because we're about over time. So let's see. Okay, I think I can do this in 5 minutes. This section might be worth reading. Okay, so for the video, as a general territorial project, Smart Growth's periphery core strategy seems to have forged a specific kind of state space, one that is thick, quote unquote thick, with more authoritarian in some places, yet thin, with more liberal in others. With respect to thickness, efforts to preserve open space and reduce sprawl include the use of urban growth boundaries, habitat conservation plans, exclusive farm use zoning, amongst other tools. More dramatically, the heavy involvement of state legislature in urban development, as detailed in chapter 2 of this book, has certainly pulled once localized policy discretion over land use into the ambit of higher skilled political authority. Basically, this paragraph here just talks about urban growth management, conservation plans, and exclusive farm zoning supported by state level, or in the case in the Philippines, that would be regional level policy. Portland's emphasis on infill development and channeling new growth into core areas has also led to to parallel thinning of state power, uh, at least within the confines of targeted growth areas, supporting those who see the steady new liberation of urban policy and spatial development. So that's a bit, that statement is a bit technical for me because I'm not a policy like social political social politics major. So in concrete terms, call for infill involve, for instance, relaxing or reforming zoning restrictions that otherwise forbid more intensive forms of development. And then example here is Raymond et al. 2000 argue that strict enforcement of regulations in central cities of the US is one of the causes of decline in the amount of construction activity. Accordingly, cities can be more competitive in attracting development by adopting a more business-friendly philosophy and approach to building code enforcement. So the benefit of this reference here is that it's a bit newer. The con of this reference is it's very socio-political. It has a lot of political terms that even me, I'm not familiar with. But this could be, I'll go through this again next week, and then maybe I can find something that could be applicable in the Philippines. But in summary, we're already like 3 minutes in. Impact fees very widely used in the U.S. might have a chance of being implemented in the Philippines. There are several different types of impact fees. Specifically, the easiest one to implement is for water and sewerage, followed by parks, road, and then fire, drainage, school, beach, police, and library facilities are also included. I think, let's see, our reference here by Stewart and Porter includes water and sewer impact fees, descriptions for park impact fees, road impact fees, law enforcement, and jails. So maybe law enforcement is, for me in Cebu, law enforcement isn't so bad yet, but maybe you in your local area you might experience something different. So for our final report on kanang growth management and like a growth management plan, I think I would really highly advise that we focus on water and sewer and parks. We'll leave the road impact fees maybe for your next class, the one after this. And you will always have the reference anyway. Then the other option for managing growth is the transfer of development rights. So this one is a bit trickier. You will need, the Philippines will need some kind of program and then some understanding between the developer and the local community where the developer wants to build. Definitely a bit more complicated than impact fees. Basically just charging the developer for new development or projects. And here is, for example, the developer wants to create a project in a protected area and then just stopping that development and moving it somewhere else. And then the final sort of description here of urban growth management goes back to what we talked about, establishing growth boundaries, and what are the legal concerns behind that, and what do you call this? Managing development outside the jurisdiction of a local community. So again, just 3 ways to manage growth: application of impact fees, application of development, transfer of development rights or TDR, and then establishing growth boundaries. And then as we mentioned last week, all of these sort of programs would not be feasible if we don't have some kind of Philippine land use regulation, which currently I think is not yet a law, but we do have laws protecting our natural resources. We have a list of protected areas, as we talked about last week, in Region 7. I'm sure the other regions have different protected areas. And then the only challenge now is to create what do you call this? Growth management plans or urban growth management plans that actually that are rational and can convince developers to stay away from the protected areas. The challenge here is that developers will always have the sort of the advantage of having more money than the local government. And then the other challenge that Filipinos and Cebuanos in general are apathetic towards protecting our natural resources. So the growth management plan should raise awareness of these protected areas. Why is it important to protect them? Also raise awareness on the lack of or the I think a lot of people in Cebu are already aware of the reduced quality of public infrastructure. So we're already experiencing a lot of traffic congestion in our roads, a lot of drainage problems, especially when flooding occurs. Access to water is a big problem. So I think for the most part, a growth management plan can encourage local, not just local officials, but local citizens to become part of it because there's really a lot of problems, at least here in Cebu, and then maybe in your local area as well. So our goal in this class, like a few weeks from now, is to create a growth management plan using QGIS. We'll just draw it in QGIS, highlight the different areas, and then consider all these different issues. So with talking about protected areas, talking about urban growth boundaries, impact fees, and the transfer of development rights. So hopefully I'll be able to prepare a PowerPoint for that next week. And then hopefully this video will encourage you to read through yourself the references. Okay, it's 2:32. I need to prepare for my next class. Stop recording here. We'll do a quick